I never thought my wedding reception would end with my own father being escorted out in handcuffs, but here we are. The moment I overheard him whisper to my brother Marcus, while everyone's distracted, "Go and take the documents from her room," I knew our family's carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. What I discovered that night wasn't just theft, it was 23 years of lies, manipulation, and a conspiracy that had shaped my entire life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Riverside Manor looked like something out of a fairy tale that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the mahogany floors, and white roses from the estate's garden adorned every table. It was exactly the kind of venue I'd dreamed of since I was little, elegant, timeless, and expensive. Very expensive. "I still can't believe we're actually here," my maid of honor, Jessica, whispered as she adjusted my train. "This place costs more than most people make in a year." I smoothed my silk dress and checked my reflection in the antique mirror. Dad insisted on paying for everything. Said it was the least he could do after all these years. Through the tall windows, I could see the reception in full swing. 200 guests mingled on the terrace, champagne glasses catching the last rays of sunset. The string quartet we'd hired was playing something classical and beautiful, and everything looked absolutely perfect. But perfection, I was about to learn, sometimes hides the darkest secrets. My father, Robert Blackwood, stood near the head table, looking distinguished in his tailored tuxedo. At 62, he still commanded attention wherever he went, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made people automatically assume he was important. Which, according to him, he was. "Your father looks so proud," Jessica observed, following my gaze. "He's been bragging to everyone about this wedding. I heard him tell the mayor that no expense was too great for his little girl." I smiled, but something felt off. Dad had been acting strangely all week, taking mysterious phone calls, meeting with people he wouldn't introduce to me, and asking odd questions about my apartment and whether I kept any important papers there. Natalie, my new husband, David, appeared in the doorway, looking handsome but concerned. "Your brother's been asking everyone where your spare key is. Says your dad sent him to get something from your place." My blood ran cold. "What kind of something?" He wouldn't say. Just kept insisting it was urgent family business. I stepped closer to the window, scanning the crowd for Marcus. My older brother was 28, worked for Dad's investment firm, and had always been the golden child. Where I'd chosen to become a freelance journalist, much to my father's disappointment, Marcus had dutifully followed Dad into the family business. "There," David pointed to the far corner of the terrace. "He's talking to that group of Dad's business associates." I watched my brother's animated conversation, noting how the men around him kept glancing toward the manor house. Something was definitely wrong. "David, I need you to do something for me," I said, my journalist instincts kicking in. "Go mingle with that group. Listen to what they're saying. Don't be obvious about it." "Nat, what's going on?" "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." As David headed back to the reception, I stayed by the window, watching. That's when I saw my father approach Marcus, his hand on my brother's shoulder, leaning in close. Even from this distance, I could see the urgency in Dad's body language. I cracked open the window, hoping to catch some of their conversation, but the music and laughter made it impossible. Frustrated, I decided to get closer. I made my way through the manor's elegant hallways, my heels clicking against the marble floors. The staff had left a service door unlocked, and I slipped out onto a small balcony that overlooked the terrace below. That's when I heard it. "While everyone's distracted, go and take the documents from her room," Dad was saying, his voice low but urgent. "Check her desk, her filing cabinet, anywhere she might keep important papers." "What if she notices they're missing?" Marcus asked. "She won't. Not tonight. And by tomorrow, it won't matter." "Dad, I still don't understand why." "Because your sister has been asking too many questions," Dad interrupted, his tone sharp. "About the Harrison Industries deal, about the missing funds, about things that are none of her business. She's got documents that could destroy everything we've built. My heart started pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it from below. Harrison Industries, I'd been investigating them for months. It was supposed to be a simple story about corporate fraud, but the deeper I dug, the more connections I found to Dad's investment firm. The timing is perfect, Dad continued. Everyone thinks she's just a starry-eyed bride tonight. No one will suspect anything. Get those files, Marcus. All of them. And if I can't find them? Dad's voice turned cold. Then we'll have to consider other options. I pressed myself against the wall, my mind racing. Other options? What did that mean? She's my sister, Dad, Marcus said, and for a moment, I thought I heard hesitation in his voice. She's a threat, Dad replied firmly. To our family, to our business, to everything. She chose to be a journalist instead of joining the family. She chose to investigate people who should be left alone. She made her choice, and now we have to make ours. The weight of what I was hearing crashed over me like a wave. My own father, the man who'd just walked me down the aisle, who'd given such a beautiful speech about how proud he was of me, was planning to steal my investigative files. Files that apparently contained evidence of something so damaging that he was willing to commit a crime to get them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But what terrified me most was that phrase, other options. As I watched Marcus reluctantly nod and head toward the parking area, presumably to get my apartment key from my purse, I realized that my fairy tale wedding was about to become a nightmare. Because I had those documents they wanted. And they contained evidence that would not only destroy my father's business, they would send him to prison for a very long time. The question was, what was I going to do about it? 23 years. That's how long I'd been the perfect daughter to Robert Blackwood, respected businessman and pillar of our community in Willowbrook Heights. 23 years of family dinners where I smiled politely while Dad bragged about his latest business deals. 23 years of being told I was too curious for my own good whenever I asked questions about his work. Tonight, standing on that balcony in my wedding dress, I finally understood why. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, at the most expensive wedding reception in town, wearing a dress that cost more than some people's cars, in a venue that Dad had insisted on paying for, and I was about to expose him as a criminal. Mrs. Henderson? A soft voice behind me made me jump. One of the catering staff had found me on the balcony. Your husband is looking for you. He says it's important. I forced a smile and smoothed my dress. Of course. Thank you. As I made my way back through the manor, my mind was spinning. The Harrison Industries investigation had started 6 months ago as a simple assignment from Metropolitan Business Weekly. What should have been a straightforward piece about corporate restructuring had turned into something much darker when I discovered discrepancies in their financial reports. The more I dug, the more suspicious it became. Missing funds, falsified documents, shell companies that existed only on paper. And somewhere in the middle of it all, like a spider in the center of a web, was Blackwood Investments, my father's company. At first, I'd told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe Dad's firm had simply been unlucky enough to invest in a corrupt company. It happened all the time in the investment world. But then I'd found the internal emails. David was waiting for me near the head table, his expression troubled. Nat, we need to talk. Privately. What did you hear? He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Your father's business partners were discussing something called Project Nightingale. They mentioned your name specifically. My blood turned to ice. Project Nightingale was the code name Harrison Industries had used for their money laundering operation. If Dad's associates knew about it, and knew I was investigating it, then this was bigger than I'd imagined. David, I need you to trust me on something, I said, taking his hands. Go to the bar and order us both champagne. Take your time. Make conversation with people. Act completely normal. Where are you going? To save my life. Possibly literally. Before he could protest, I slipped away from the reception and headed for the manor's library. Riverside Manor was the kind of old estate that had been built by robber barons, complete with hidden passages and secret rooms. During our venue tour, the owner had mentioned that the library had a private telephone line that guests could use for urgent business calls. I needed to make a very urgent call. My hands shook as I dialed the number I'd memorized but hoped I'd never have to use. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. FBI Financial Crimes Division, Agent Sarah Chin speaking. Agent Chin, this is Natalie Blackwood. We spoke 3 weeks ago about the Harrison Industries case. Ms. Blackwood? I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. Isn't this your wedding day? Yes, and I'm calling from my reception. I took a deep breath. I just overheard my father instructing my brother to break into my apartment and steal my investigative files on Harrison Industries. The same files I've been sharing with your investigation. There was a pause. Are you certain about what you heard? Agent Chin, my father is Robert Blackwood of Blackwood Investments. I think he's not just connected to Harrison Industries, I think he's been running the entire operation. Another pause, longer this time. Ms. Blackwood, stay exactly where you are. Don't let anyone know you've made this call. We've been investigating your father's firm for the past 2 months, based partly on the information you provided. We have agents in the area. Agents in the area? How close? Close enough. Can you get back to your reception and act normal for the next 30 minutes? I thought about Marcus, probably already on his way to my apartment. About Dad, schmoozing with guests while planning to destroy evidence of his crimes. About the 200 people celebrating my marriage who had no idea they were attending what might become the scene of the biggest financial fraud arrest in our town's history. I can try, I said. Ms. Blackwood, Natalie, you're incredibly brave for calling this in. I know this can't be easy. Brave. That was a word no one had ever used to describe me. I'd always been the quiet one, the obedient daughter, the one who colored inside the lines. Even my choice to become a journalist had been seen as a safe, respectable career for a young woman from a good family. But sometimes, I was learning, being brave meant destroying everything you thought you knew about your life. As I hung up the phone and prepared to return to my wedding reception, I realized that the perfect daughter Robert Blackwood had raised was about to become his worst nightmare. And the most terrifying part? I was starting to look forward to it. The walk back to my reception felt like walking to my own execution. Every step across the marble floors of Riverside Manor echoed in my ears, a countdown to the moment when I'd have to look my father in the eye and pretend I hadn't just heard him orchestrate a felony. The French doors opened onto the terrace, and immediately I was enveloped by the sounds of celebration. The string quartet had transitioned to something livelier, and several couples were dancing on the makeshift dance floor. The scene was so perfectly normal, so beautifully innocent, that for a moment I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the entire conversation on the balcony. Then I saw Marcus. He was standing near the gift table, checking his phone with an expression I'd never seen before, nervous, guilty, like a child caught stealing cookies. When he looked up and caught my eye, his face went pale. There's the beautiful bride. Dad's booming voice cut through my thoughts as he approached with a champagne flute in each hand. Natalie, darling, you disappeared right when the photographer wanted to take some family photos. I accepted the champagne, proud that my hands weren't visibly shaking. Sorry, Dad. I just needed a moment to take it all in. This is all so overwhelming. Only the best for my little girl, he said, his arms sliding around my shoulders in what anyone watching would see as an affectionate paternal gesture. But now I could feel the tension in his grip, the way his fingers pressed just a little too firmly against my arm. Dad, have you seen Marcus lately? I asked, testing him. David mentioned he was looking for something. For just a split second, Dad's smile faltered. Oh, you know your brother. Always losing his keys, his wallet, something. I think he was worried he'd left something important in his car. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly, so naturally, that I wondered how many other lies I'd believed over the years. How many family dinner conversations had been carefully constructed deceptions. How many times had I sat at our dining room table while Dad fed me stories about honest business deals and legitimate investments? Natalie. Jessica appeared at my elbow, slightly breathless from dancing. Your great-aunt Millicent is asking for you. She wants to give you her blessing before she leaves. Of course, I said, grateful for the excuse to escape Dad's suffocating presence. Lead the way. As Jessica guided me through the crowd, I caught glimpses of the other guests. Dad's business associates clustered near the bar, their voices low and serious despite the festive atmosphere. Mom's garden club friends admiring the floral arrangements. David's college roommates telling embarrassing stories about his bachelor party. All of these people had come to celebrate what they thought was the happiest day of my life. They'd brought gifts, worn their best clothes, cleared their Saturday evening schedules to witness my marriage to David. And none of them had any idea that the bride they were toasting had just called the FBI on her own father. Great-aunt Millicent was holding court near the dessert table, her wheelchair surrounded by cousins and family friends. At 93, she was the family matriarch, the keeper of stories and the dispenser of unsolicited advice. She'd been the one constant in my life, the person who'd encouraged my curiosity when everyone else told me to mind my own business. There she is, Aunt Millicent said, her voice still strong despite her age. Come here, child. Let me look at you. I knelt beside her wheelchair, and she took my hands in hers. Her skin was paper-thin and spotted with age, but her grip was surprisingly firm. You look beautiful, Natalie. But more than that, you look troubled. Trust Aunt Millicent to see right through me. Just wetting nerves, I think. She studied my face with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. When I married your great-uncle in 1952, I was nervous about the cake falling over, about my dress ripping, about forgetting my vows. But you, my dear, look like someone carrying a much heavier burden. Aunt Millicent. Your father's been acting strangely all evening, she continued, lowering her voice. Keeps checking his phone, having hushed conversations with those business friends of his. And your brother left 20 minutes ago without saying goodbye to anyone. My heart stopped. Marcus left? Saw him slip out through the side entrance. Looked like a man on a mission. She squeezed my hands. Natalie, in my 93 years, I've learned to recognize the signs when a family is in trouble. Whatever's happening, you need to be very careful. Before I could respond, David appeared beside us. Sorry to interrupt, but Nat, there's someone here who wants to meet you. Says she's a colleague of yours? I looked across the terrace and saw a woman in an elegant black dress approaching us. She was Asian, probably in her 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested law enforcement. My stomach dropped. Agent Sarah Chen had come to my wedding. Natalie, this is Sarah Chen, David said, completely oblivious to the significance. She said you two have been working on a story together? Something like that, Agent Chen said smoothly, extending her hand. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you don't mind me crashing your reception, but I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to wish you well. In the neighborhood. Right. Of course not, I managed. Any colleague of mine is welcome here. Actually, Agent Chen continued, I was hoping we could chat for a few minutes about that project we discussed. I have some updates that might interest you. Aunt Millicent was watching this exchange with the sharp attention of someone who'd lived through enough family dramas to recognize another one unfolding. Natalie, why don't you and your friend take a walk through the gardens? They're particularly beautiful in the evening light. That's a wonderful idea, Agent Chen agreed. As we walked away from the reception, David falling into step beside us, I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching our departure. In a small town like Willowbrook Heights, everyone knew everyone else's business. A stranger at a wedding was noteworthy. A stranger who wanted to talk privately with the bride was definitely going to be remembered. David, I said as we reached the edge of the formal gardens, could you give us a few minutes? Sarah and I need to discuss some sensitive source material. He looked confused but nodded. I'll be back at the reception when you're ready. Once he was out of earshot, Agent Chen's professional mask slipped into place. We have a problem, Natalie. Your brother arrived at your apartment building 15 minutes ago. Our surveillance team is in position, but we need to know exactly what he's looking for. I thought about the filing cabinet in my home office, stuffed with 6 months of investigative notes, financial documents, recorded phone calls, and email printouts. Everything I'd gathered on Harrison Industries was there, organized in neat folders with labels like Shell Companies, and Money Trail, and Robert Blackwood Connections. Everything, I said simply. He's looking for everything that could connect my father to Harrison Industries. And if he finds it? If he finds it, we lose our best evidence against one of the largest money laundering operations we've seen in this region, Agent Chin finished. Natalie, I need you to make a choice right now. We can arrest your brother for breaking and entering, but that would tip off your father and potentially compromise the entire investigation. Or what? Or you help us catch them in the act. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus. Can't find your spare key. Where do you usually hide it? Agent Chin saw the message over my shoulder. Perfect. What do you want to tell him? I stared at the phone screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Whatever I typed next would determine whether my brother spent the night in jail, whether my father's crimes would be exposed, and whether my family would ever speak to me again. But most importantly, it would determine what kind of person I was going to be from this moment forward. The perfect daughter, or the woman who chose truth over family loyalty. I started typing. My fingers trembled as I typed back to Marcus, under the fake rock by the front door, left side. Hope everything's okay. Agent Chin watched me send the message, then nodded approvingly. Good. That gives our team time to get into position. Now, I need you to go back to your reception and act completely normal. Can you do that? Could I? I wasn't sure. 23 years of being Robert Blackwood's daughter had taught me many things, but none of them had prepared me for this moment. How do you smile and cut cake and dance with your new husband when you've just helped set a trap for your own family? I'll try, I said, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. As we walked back toward the manor, Agent Chen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly, then looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Natalie, there's something else you need to know. We've been monitoring your father's communications for the past 3 weeks. This isn't just about stolen money or creative accounting. I stopped walking. What do you mean? Harrison Industries wasn't just laundering money for themselves. They were providing financial services to some very dangerous people. Drug cartels, human trafficking organizations, terrorist groups. Your father's investment firm has been the cornerstone of an operation that's moved over $50 million in illegal funds in the past 2 years. The world seemed to tilt sideways. $50 million. Drug cartels. Terrorist groups. This wasn't corporate fraud or tax evasion or any of the white-collar crimes I'd imagined. This was something that belonged in action movies, not in the life of a small-town investment advisor who coached Little League on weekends. That's impossible, I whispered. My father, he's not that kind of person. He's never even gotten a speeding ticket. The best criminals never do, Agent Chen said gently. Your father has built the perfect cover. Respected businessman, community leader, devoted family man. Who would suspect Robert Blackwood of Willowbrook Heights of facilitating international money laundering? We reached the edge of the terrace, and I could see the reception continuing in full swing. Dad was now at the center of a group of his golf buddies, gesturing animatedly as he told some story. Mom was coordinating with the photographer for more family photos. Everything looked so normal, so innocent. How long have you known? I asked. We've suspected for about 6 months. But we needed proof, and that's where your investigation became invaluable. You were gathering evidence from the inside without even realizing it. My investigation. What had started as curiosity about some inconsistencies in Harrison Industries' financial reports had somehow become the key to unraveling my father's double life. I thought about all those late nights I'd spent poring over documents, all the phone calls I'd made to sources, all the questions I'd asked that had made Dad increasingly uncomfortable over the past few months. He knew, I said suddenly. He knew what I was discovering. That's why he's been so strange lately, why he's been asking about my work, about what stories I'm working on. We believe so, yes. And we think tonight was supposed to be the perfect opportunity to eliminate the evidence. A big family celebration, lots of alcohol, everyone distracted. By tomorrow morning, your files would have disappeared, and with them, our case. I watched my father across the terrace, seeing him with completely new eyes. The way he commanded attention, the way people naturally deferred to his opinions, the way he could make anyone believe anything he wanted them to believe. These weren't just the traits of a successful businessman, they were the skills of a master manipulator. There's something else, Agent Shin continued. We have reason to believe your father knows about your cooperation with our investigation. Ice formed in my veins. What kind of reason? 3 days ago, someone made inquiries about you with the editor at Metropolitan Business Weekly. Asked about your current assignments, your sources, your methods. The editor thought it was strange enough to mention it to our liaisons in the Financial Crimes Unit. 3 days ago. That would have been Wednesday, the day after our final wedding rehearsal. The day Dad had insisted on taking me to lunch, just the two of us, to talk about how proud he was of me and how much he loved me. The day he'd asked, seemingly casually, about my work and whether I was careful about protecting my sources and research materials. Oh God, I breathed. He was fishing for information. He was trying to figure out how much I knew. And now he knows it's enough to be dangerous. Natalie, I want you to understand something. Your father isn't just trying to steal some files tonight. He's trying to save himself from spending the rest of his life in federal prison. People in that situation can become unpredictable. The weight of what she was saying settled over me like a lead blanket. My father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with homework, who'd walked me down the aisle just hours ago, was potentially dangerous. What am I supposed to do with that information? I asked. Be careful. Stay in public areas. Don't be alone with him tonight. A burst of laughter from the reception drew our attention. David was talking with some of his co-workers, probably sharing embarrassing stories about our courtship. He looked so happy, so completely unaware that his wife was currently plotting against her own family with federal agents. Agent Chen, when this all comes out, when you arrest him, what happens to everyone else? To my mother, to the guests, to David? Your mother isn't implicated in any of the financial crimes, as far as we know. The guests will go home with an interesting story to tell. And David. She paused. David will have to decide whether he can love a woman who turned in her own father. That thought had been lurking in the back of my mind since I'd made the phone call from the library. David had married Natalie Blackwood, beloved daughter of a respected businessman. Tomorrow, he might wake up married to the woman who destroyed one of Willowbrook Heights' most prominent families. I should get back, I said. People will start wondering where I am. One more thing, Agent Shin said, handing me a small device that looked like a hearing aid. If you feel unsafe at any point tonight, if your father becomes suspicious, if the situation changes, put this in your ear and say the code word Nightingale. We'll have agents here within minutes. Nightingale. The same code name Harrison Industries had used for their money laundering operation. It felt appropriate, somehow, that the word that had started this whole investigation would be the one that could save my life. I slipped the device into my purse and walked back onto the terrace, my new husband's face lighting up when he saw me approach. There you are, David said, wrapping his arms around me. I was starting to worry you'd run off with your mysterious colleague. Never, I said, forcing a smile. Though I might need to step away periodically. Work never stops for journalists, even on their wedding day. As David spun me around in an impromptu dance, I caught sight of Dad watching us from across the terrace. He was smiling, but there was something calculating in his eyes, something that made me remember Agent Chen's warning about unpredictable people in desperate situations. My phone buzzed with another message from Marcus, found what I was looking for. Heading back now. The trap had been set. The evidence was secure. And in a few hours, everything I'd ever believed about my family would be destroyed forever. But first, I had to survive the rest of my own wedding reception. Marcus returned to the reception 45 minutes later, and I watched him like a hawk as he made his way through the crowd. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and there was a manila envelope tucked under his arm that definitely hadn't been there when he'd left. But what struck me most was his expression, a mixture of guilt, confusion, and something that looked almost like fear. He went straight to Dad, who was still entertaining his golf buddies near the bar. I couldn't hear their conversation from where I stood with David's college friends, but I could see the body language. Marcus leaning in close, Dad's posture becoming more rigid, the quick glance they both shot in my direction when they thought I wasn't looking. "Nat, you're not listening to a word Tom is saying," David murmured in my ear. "Everything okay?" I turned back to the group, where Tom was apparently in the middle of an elaborate story about David's attempts at cooking during their senior year. "Sorry, just distracted by how beautiful everything looks." "Go on, Tom." But I wasn't distracted by beauty. I was distracted by the fact that my brother had just committed a federal crime on my father's orders, and I was the one who'd helped him do it. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, I'd been struggling with the moral implications of investigating my own father. Even after I'd found evidence of financial irregularities, even after I'd contacted the FBI, I'd told myself I was just seeking the truth. I was a journalist doing her job. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. But tonight, I'd crossed a line. I'd actively participated in a sting operation against my own family. I'd helped federal agents gather evidence that would destroy everything my father had built. And the most disturbing part was that it had felt surprisingly easy. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bandleader announced, "it's time for the father-daughter dance." My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about the traditional dances, so caught up in the drama unfolding around me that I'd lost track of the wedding schedule. Now Dad was approaching with that familiar smile, the one I'd seen at 1,000 family gatherings, the one that had always made me feel safe and loved. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Henderson?" he asked, offering his arm with exaggerated formality. I had no choice but to accept. Declining would cause a scene, and Agent Chen had specifically told me to act normal. So I let my father lead me onto the dance floor as the band began playing, "The Way You Look Tonight," the same song he'd hummed to me when I was little and couldn't sleep. "You look absolutely radiant tonight, sweetheart," Dad said as we began to move in the familiar steps he'd taught me years ago in our living room. "Your mother and I are so proud of you." "Thank you, Dad. For everything. This wedding is more beautiful than I ever imagined." We danced in comfortable silence for a moment, surrounded by guests with cameras and phones, capturing what they thought was a touching father-daughter moment. But I could feel the tension in Dad's shoulders, see the calculation behind his eyes as he studied my face. "You know, Natalie," he said finally, his voice carefully casual, "Marcus mentioned that your apartment seemed a bit disorganized when he stopped by. Papers scattered around, filing cabinets left open. You might want to be more careful about securing your work materials." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression neutral. "Really? That's strange. I'm usually very organized about my files." "Journalism can be dangerous work," Dad continued, spinning me slowly. "Investigating the wrong people, asking the wrong questions. Sometimes it's better to focus on safer stories. Human interest pieces, local events, that sort of thing." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Dad knew exactly what I'd been investigating, and he was telling me to stop. The question was, how much did he know about my cooperation with the FBI? "I appreciate your concern, Dad, but I love investigative work. There's something satisfying about uncovering the truth, even when it's complicated." His grip on my hand tightened almost imperceptibly. "Truth can be subjective, sweetheart. What looks like wrongdoing from the outside might have perfectly reasonable explanations when you understand the full context." "I'm sure that's true," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "But isn't it better to ask questions and get those explanations rather than just assume everything is fine?" For just a moment, Dad's mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating in his expression, something that made me remember Agent Chen's warnings about desperate people becoming unpredictable. Then the smile returned, warm and paternal. Of course, darling. I just want you to be safe. Family is the most important thing in the world, and we have to protect each other. The song ended, and Dad kissed my cheek as the guests applauded. But as he pulled away, he whispered something that chilled me to the bone. I hope you remember that, Natalie. Family comes first. Always. I rejoined David's group, my mind racing. Dad's message had been clear. He knew I was investigating him, and he was giving me one last chance to back down. The question was what would happen when he realized I wasn't going to take it. You look pale, Jessica observed, appearing at my elbow with a glass of water. Wedding day exhaustion? Something like that, I managed. 20 minutes later, Dad cornered me again, this time near the gift table where I was pretending to admire the elaborate display of wrapped packages and envelopes. Natalie, I need to discuss something with you, he said, his voice lower than usual. Privately. Dad, it's my wedding reception. Can't it wait until tomorrow? I'm afraid not. His hand settled on my arm, and this time there was nothing paternal about the grip. Marcus found some interesting documents in your apartment tonight. Documents that suggest you've been sharing confidential information about my business with outside parties. My mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, sweetheart. I've been patient, hoping you'd come to your senses on your own. But patience has its limits. His voice remained pleasant, conversational, but his eyes were ice cold. I know you've been talking to federal agents. I know you think you've uncovered some kind of conspiracy. And I know you're planning to testify against me. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Dad hadn't just suspected my investigation, he'd known about it all along. He'd probably known about my contact with the FBI before I'd even made tonight's phone call. This entire evening, from the moment I'd overheard him talking to Marcus, had been an elaborate performance. The question now, Dad continued, is what we're going to do about it. We? I whispered. You have two choices, Natalie. You can destroy whatever evidence you've gathered, end your cooperation with law enforcement, and we can all move forward as a family. Or... He paused, his smile becoming almost predatory. Or you can continue down this path and discover that there are consequences for betraying the people who love you. I thought about the small device in my purse, about the code word that would bring federal agents running. But we were surrounded by 200 wedding guests, including David's elderly grandparents and my young cousins. Whatever Dad was planning, I couldn't risk innocent people getting caught in the crossfire. I need time to think, I said. Of course you do. Take all the time you need. Dad released my arm and straightened his tie. But Natalie? Don't take too long. Marcus is waiting in your apartment right now, and he's found some very interesting things. Things that certain people might be willing to do anything to protect. As he walked away, leaving me standing alone by the gift table, I realized that my father hadn't just been laundering money for criminals, he'd learned to think like one. And now I was caught in a web of my own making, with federal agents on one side, my family on the other, and nowhere safe to run. The perfect daughter was about to discover just how imperfect her world really was. The next hour passed in a surreal haze of wedding traditions that felt increasingly absurd given the circumstances. I smiled for photos while my father threatened me. I cut the cake while federal agents monitored my brother's criminal activities. I threw my bouquet while contemplating whether my own family might actually harm me. David's cousin Emma caught the bouquet, squealing with delight as the other single women playfully groaned their disappointment. The crowd cheered, champagne flutes raised in celebration, and for a moment I almost forgot that my life was imploding in real time. Your turn for the garter toss, the wedding coordinator announced, and I watched David kneel beside my chair as the men gathered behind him. It should have been sweet, romantic even, but all I could think about was Dad's words, Marcus is waiting in your apartment right now. My phone had been ominously silent since Marcus's last text. Either the FBI had arrested him or something had gone very wrong. As David playfully removed the blue silk garter from my leg, I caught sight of Agent Chen near the edge of the terrace. She was dressed like any other wedding guest, chatting with someone's elderly aunt about the beautiful flowers, but I could see the tension in her posture. Something had definitely happened. The garter sailed through the air and landed in the hands of David's best man, Jake, who immediately turned red as the crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Under the cover of the celebration, I managed to catch Agent Chen's eye. She gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Marcus hadn't been arrested. Which meant the trap hadn't worked the way we'd planned. "Nat, you look like you're about to be sick," Jessica whispered, appearing beside me as the crowd began to disperse back to their conversations and dancing. "What's going on?" I wanted desperately to tell her everything. Jessica had been my best friend since college, the one person who'd never judged my choices or tried to change me. She'd supported my decision to become a journalist even when my family had been horrified. She'd helped me through every major crisis in my adult life. But this was different. This involved federal crimes and dangerous people and family loyalty twisted into something unrecognizable. This was the kind of secret that could destroy friendships along with everything else. "Just overwhelmed," I said. "It's been a very long day. Why don't you go freshen up? I'll cover for you with the relatives." I nodded gratefully and headed back into the manor, ostensibly toward the powder room but actually seeking another opportunity to speak with Agent Chen. The library where I'd made my first call seemed like the safest option, but as I approached the door, I heard voices inside. "Absolutely sure the files were destroyed?" Dad's voice, tense and urgent. "Every single document," Marcus replied. "Computer hard drive, backup drives, physical files, everything." "But Dad, I have to ask." "Don't ask. Don't think. Just trust that everything I've done has been to protect this family." "But the federal investigation. We'll find nothing. Without Natalie's evidence, they have no case. Corporate financial records are complicated things, Marcus. Easy to misinterpret when you don't understand the full picture." I pressed myself against the wall beside the library door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Marcus had destroyed my files. 6 months of investigative work, gone. All the evidence I'd gathered linking Dad to Harrison Industries, eliminated. But they didn't know about Agent Chen's copies. They didn't know that I'd been sharing information with the FBI all along, that destroying my personal files wouldn't eliminate the federal case against them. "What about Natalie?" Marcus asked. "She's going to notice that everything's gone. Natalie is going to understand that family loyalty comes before everything else," Dad said coldly. "And if she doesn't understand that naturally, she'll learn it." "Dad, you're scaring me. She's my sister. She's a threat to everything we've built. To your future, to your mother's security, to the life we've all enjoyed. Sometimes threats have to be neutralized." Neutralized. The word hung in the air like a physical presence, cold and threatening. My father was talking about neutralizing me, his own daughter, the bride at her own wedding reception. I backed away from the door as quietly as possible, my mind racing. I needed to find Agent Chen immediately. Whatever game we'd been playing had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. The terrace was still full of guests enjoying the evening air and the string quartet's romantic melodies. I spotted Agent Chen near the champagne fountain, and began making my way toward her when a hand grabbed my elbow. "There you are, sweetheart." Dad's voice was warm, affectionate, completely at odds with the conversation I'd just overheard. "I've been looking for you." "Just needed some air," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. It's overwhelming, isn't it? All these people, all this attention." His grip on my elbow was firm but not quite painful. To anyone watching, it would look like a father ensuring his daughter didn't stumble in her wedding heels. "Why don't we take a little walk? Just the two of us. We need to finish our conversation." "Dad, I should really get back to the guests." "The guests can wait. This is more important." He was already steering me away from the crowd, toward the darker part of the gardens where the formal landscaping gave way to wilder, more secluded areas. Away from witnesses. Away from Agent Chen. Away from safety. Dad, I don't think this is a good idea. Nonsense. We're just going to have a father-daughter chat. Nothing to worry about. But everything about his demeanor told me there was plenty to worry about. The way he kept looking around to make sure no one was following us. The way his free hand kept reaching into his jacket pocket. The way he positioned himself so that I couldn't easily break away and run back toward the reception. You know, Natalie, he said as we walked deeper into the shadows, I've been thinking about what you said earlier. About asking questions and getting explanations. I think it's time I gave you some full context about my business dealings. Here. Now. Why not? You wanted the truth, didn't you? We'd reached a small clearing surrounded by tall hedges, probably designed as a romantic spot for manor guests to propose or steal private moments. In the moonlight, it looked beautiful and peaceful. It also looked like the perfect place to have a conversation that no one else would overhear. The truth is, sweetheart, that sometimes good people have to make difficult choices. Sometimes protecting the people you love requires doing things that others might not understand. What kind of things? Dad's hand finally emerged from his jacket pocket, and I saw the glint of metal in the moonlight. Not a gun, something smaller, more discreet. A syringe. The kind of things that ensure family secrets stay in the family, he said softly. I thought about the device in my purse, about the code word that would bring help. But would it come fast enough? And what would Dad do if he realized I was calling for backup? Dad, you're frightening me. I don't want to frighten you, Natalie. I love you more than life itself. But love sometimes requires sacrifice. His voice was gentle, almost hypnotic. You've put me in an impossible position. You forced me to choose between protecting my daughter and protecting my family's future. I never meant. I know you didn't. That's what makes this so tragic. He took a step closer, and I could see tears in his eyes. Real tears, which somehow made the whole situation even more terrifying. But the federal investigation has to stop. The questions have to stop. And unfortunately, sweetheart, you're the only one who can make that happen. The syringe caught the moonlight again, and I realized that my father, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd helped me with algebra homework, who'd cried at my high school graduation, was planning to drug me. Possibly kill me. At my own wedding reception. And the most horrifying part was that he genuinely believed he was doing it out of love. Time seemed to slow as Dad stepped closer, the syringe gleaming in his hand like a twisted wedding gift. My mind raced through possibilities. Scream and hope someone heard me over the music, run and risk him catching me in these ridiculous heels, or try to talk my way out of what was clearly a carefully planned ambush. Dad, please, I said, taking a careful step backward. We can figure this out. We're family. That's exactly why we need to figure it out, he replied, his voice carrying that same gentle tone he'd used when I was sick as a child. Natalie, what's in this syringe won't hurt you. It's just a sedative. You'll sleep for a few hours, and when you wake up, we'll be somewhere safe where we can talk properly. Somewhere safe sounded ominous when spoken by a man holding drugs in a secluded garden. I thought about David back at the reception, probably wondering where his bride had disappeared to. I thought about Agent Chen, who would eventually notice I was missing but might not find me in time. What about my wedding? I asked, stalling for time while my hand slowly moved toward my purse. David will notice I'm gone. People will ask questions. I've already spoken with your mother. She's going to announce that you're feeling overwhelmed and needed to rest. David will understand, wedding day exhaustion affects lots of brides. Dad's explanation was so matter-of-fact, so thoroughly planned, that I realized this wasn't a spontaneous decision. He'd been preparing for this moment, possibly for weeks. Mom knows what you're doing? Pain flickered across his features. Your mother knows that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made to protect the people we love. She doesn't know the details, and she doesn't want to know. My fingers found the small device Agent Chen had given me, but Dad noticed the movement immediately. Hands where I can see them, sweetheart, he said, his tone still loving but now carrying an edge of steel. I know the FBI gave you some kind of communication device. I've been watching you all evening. He'd been watching me. Which meant he'd probably seen my conversation with Agent Shin, had probably known about the surveillance operation from the beginning. This entire evening, the overheard conversation with Marcus, the discovery of my investigation, even my call to the FBI, had been orchestrated. You knew, I whispered. You knew I was working with the federal agents. I've known for weeks. Did you really think you could investigate Blackwood Investments without me finding out? I built that company from nothing, Natalie. I know every file, every transaction, every contact. And I certainly know when my own daughter starts asking questions about things that don't concern her. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not just Dad's betrayal, but my own naive belief that I'd been conducting a secret investigation. I'd been stumbling around like an amateur while he'd been playing a game I didn't even understand. The documents Marcus destroyed, those weren't even the real files, were they? Dad smiled, and for the first time all evening, it reached his eyes. Very good. No, those were carefully constructed duplicates designed to make the FBI think they'd lost their evidence. The real files, the ones that could actually damage me, have been in a secure location for months. Then why? Because I needed to know how far you'd gone. What you'd discovered, who you'd contacted, how much damage control was necessary. He took another step closer, and I could smell his familiar cologne mixed with something chemical from the syringe. And because I needed to get you alone without arousing suspicion. Dad, please. I'm your daughter. You love me. I do love you. That's why this is breaking my heart. Tears were streaming down his face now, which somehow made the whole situation more terrifying than if he'd been cold and calculating. But you forced my hand, sweetheart. The federal investigation has to end, and you're the only witness who can tie me directly to Harrison Industries. But you said the files. The files are circumstantial evidence. Financial records that could be explained away by good lawyers. But your testimony? Your first-hand knowledge of my operations? That's what would put me in prison for the rest of my life. I realized with growing horror that Dad wasn't planning to drug me temporarily. He was planning to make me disappear permanently. The sedative was just the first step in a plan that would end with his own daughter becoming another casualty of his criminal enterprise. People will ask questions if I disappear, I said desperately. David, my friends, my colleagues. You won't disappear, Dad said softly. You'll have a tragic accident. Maybe a car crash on your way to the honeymoon. Maybe a slip and fall during a romantic walk. These things happen, especially to young women who've been drinking at their wedding receptions. The casual way he discussed murdering me was more chilling than any rage would have been. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of desperation. This was a business decision, calculated and planned with the same attention to detail he brought to his investment strategies. David will never believe. David will be devastated. He'll grieve appropriately, probably for years. But he'll move on eventually, maybe even remarry. Life goes on, Natalie. That's what makes these decisions so difficult but sometimes necessary. A sound from the direction of the manor made us both freeze. Voices, getting closer. Someone was looking for me. Natalie? Where are you? The photographer wants to do a few more shots before the light goes completely. Jessica's voice, getting nearer. Dad's expression hardened. We're out of time, he said, raising the syringe. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I truly am. Nightingale. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Nightingale. Dad lunged forward, but my scream had startled him enough that his aim was off. The syringe caught the fabric of my dress instead of my arm, and I twisted away, stumbling backward into the hedge. What the hell? Jessica's voice was much closer now, and I could hear other people with her. Help! I shouted. In the garden. Help me. Dad looked torn between finishing what he'd started and fleeing before witnesses arrived. The sound of running footsteps made the decision for him. This isn't over, he hissed, pocketing the syringe. Family loyalty goes both ways, Natalie. You've made your choice, and now I'll make mine. He disappeared into the shadows just as Jessica burst through the hedge opening, followed by David and 2 of his groomsmen. Nat. What happened? You look terrified. Jessica grabbed my shoulders, steadying me as I swayed in my torn dress. My father, I gasped. He tried to, but before I could finish the sentence, I heard the sound I'd been praying for all evening, the distinctive wail of sirens approaching Riverside Manor. Agent Chen had received my signal. The cavalry was finally coming. But as I looked toward the manor and saw the guests beginning to notice the emergency vehicles, I realized that Dad had been right about one thing: this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And now everyone I loved was about to be caught in the crossfire of a war I'd started but never understood. The perfect daughter's wedding day was about to become the perfect daughter's worst nightmare. The next few minutes unfolded like a choreographed disaster. FBI agents in tactical gear swarmed through Riverside Manor's elegant halls while wedding guests clutched their champagne flutes and stared in bewilderment. The string quartet stopped mid-song, their violins hanging silent as armed federal agents took positions around the terrace. Everyone remain calm and stay where you are, Agent Chen's voice carried across the reception as she flashed her badge. This is official FBI business. No one is in danger, but we need everyone to cooperate fully. I watched from the garden entrance as my wedding reception transformed into a crime scene. Great Aunt Millicent sat perfectly upright in her wheelchair, observing the chaos with the sharp interest of someone who'd lived through the Great Depression and wasn't easily rattled. Mom stood frozen by the cake table, her face a mask of confusion and growing horror. David's parents huddled together near the bar, whispering frantically to each other. Nat, I don't understand what's happening, David said, his arm around my waist as we approached the main terrace. Why are there federal agents at our wedding? What did you mean about your father? Before I could answer, Agent Chen appeared at my side. Mrs. Henderson, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I'm okay, I said, though my hands were still shaking. He had a syringe, but he didn't. I got away. We found the syringe, Agent Chen said grimly. Preliminary field test shows it contained enough rohypnol to incapacitate someone your size for several hours. Mrs. Henderson, your father was planning to kidnap you. David's face went white. Kidnap? Robert tried to kidnap his own daughter? Where is he? I asked, scanning the crowd of confused guests. Did you find him? That's the problem. Your father seems to have disappeared. We have agents searching the manor and grounds, but... Agent Chen's expression was grim. Mrs. Henderson, we believe your father may have had an escape plan prepared for exactly this scenario. Of course he did. Dad was nothing if not thorough in his planning. He'd probably had contingency plans for his contingency plans. Agent Chen, one of the tactical officers, approached, speaking in a low voice. We found the target's vehicle in the parking area, but it's empty. No sign of Robert Blackwood anywhere on the property. My heart sank. Dad was gone, vanished into the night while federal agents secured my wedding reception. He was probably halfway to a private airfield by now, or already implementing whatever escape route he'd prepared for this possibility. We need to secure the scene and begin interviewing witnesses, Agent Chen said. Mrs. Henderson, I know this is your wedding day, but we're going to need a detailed statement from you about what happened in the garden. Of course, I said, though the words felt surreal. Giving a statement to federal agents about my father's attempt to kidnap me wasn't exactly how I'd planned to spend my wedding night. Natalie? Mom's voice cut through the chaos as she approached, her face pale and her hands trembling. Sweetheart, what's going on? These people are saying terrible things about your father, about our business. I looked at my mother, elegant, refined Margaret Blackwood, who'd spent 35 years believing she was married to an upstanding businessman. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been built on lies? Mom, I need you to sit down, I said gently. I don't want to sit down. I want to know why there are federal agents disrupting my daughter's wedding reception. I want to know where your father is. Agent Chen stepped forward. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Your husband is under federal investigation for money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering charges. Tonight, he attempted to assault your daughter to prevent her from testifying in our investigation. Mom's legs gave out, and David's father quickly guided her to a nearby chair. That's impossible, she whispered. Robert would never, he's a good man. He coaches Little League. He's on the church board. Mom, I knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. I've been investigating Dad's business for months. He's been laundering money for criminal organizations. The FBI has evidence. You've been investigating your own father? The betrayal in her voice cut deeper than I'd expected. Natalie, how could you? Because it was the right thing to do, I said, though the words felt hollow. Because people were being hurt. People were being hurt? Mom's voice rose, drawing attention from the other guests. What about our family? What about us? Did you think about that when you decided to destroy your own father? The accusation hit me like a slap. Here I was, in my torn wedding dress, having just escaped being drugged by my own father, and my mother was blaming me for exposing his crimes. Mrs. Blackwood, Agent Chen intervened. Your daughter's cooperation has been invaluable in stopping a criminal enterprise that's facilitated millions of dollars in illegal transactions. She should be proud of her courage. Courage? Mom laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling it when children betray their parents? Margaret. Great Aunt Millicent's voice cut through the argument like a blade. She'd wheeled her chair closer, and her blue eyes were sharp with authority. Stop making a fool of yourself. Aunt Millicent, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I understand that Robert has been lying to all of us for years. I understand that our Natalie had the backbone to do something about it when she discovered the truth. And I understand that you're blaming the wrong person. Mom stared at her aunt, then at me, then at the chaos surrounding us. Federal agents were methodically interviewing guests, taking statements, gathering evidence. The beautiful wedding reception I'd dreamed of had become a federal crime scene. Where's Marcus? Mom asked suddenly. If Robert is, if he's really done these things, where's our son? That was an excellent question. Marcus had supposedly returned from my apartment with destroyed files, but I hadn't seen him since the agents arrived. Given that he'd committed breaking and entering at Dad's direction, he should have been one of the first people they'd arrested. Agent Chen, I said, my brother Marcus was at my apartment tonight. He destroyed evidence on my father's orders. Shouldn't he be here? Agent Chen's expression darkened. We found your apartment empty when our team arrived. Your brother wasn't there. But he texted me that he'd found what he was looking for. Mrs. Henderson, your brother never actually went to your apartment tonight. The surveillance team we had in place never saw him arrive. The implications hit me like a freight train. Then where was he? What was he doing for all those hours? We believe your brother was helping your father implement his escape plan. The texts you received were designed to keep you believing the deception while they prepared to flee. I thought about Marcus's strange behavior when he'd returned to the reception, the manila envelope under his arm, the guilty expression I'd attributed to breaking into my apartment. He hadn't been stealing my files, he'd been helping Dad prepare to disappear. They're gone, I said, the reality settling over me like ice water. Dad and Marcus. They're both gone. We have alerts out at all airports, train stations, and border crossings, Agent Chen assured me. And we're monitoring their financial accounts. They won't get far. But even as she said it, I could see the doubt in her eyes. Dad had been planning this for a long time, had probably prepared multiple escape routes and backup identities. He'd been laundering money for years, he certainly had the resources and connections to disappear permanently if he wanted to. My father and brother had vanished into the night, leaving behind a family in ruins and a federal investigation that would probably take years to fully unravel. And I was the one who'd started it all. As I looked around at the wreckage of my wedding reception, guests being questioned by federal agents, my mother sobbing into her hands, my new husband trying to process that his father-in-law was an international criminal, I wondered if being right was worth the price I was going to pay. The perfect daughter had finally stood up for what was right. But the cost of that courage was everything she'd ever loved. 3 hours later, the last FBI agent finally left Riverside Manor, taking with them boxes of evidence, dozens of witness statements, and what remained of my family's reputation. The elegant reception hall that had been filled with laughter and celebration now looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster: overturned chairs, abandoned champagne glasses, and the lingering scent of fear. Most of the guests had been released after giving brief statements, though I could see the shock and confusion in their eyes as they gathered their belongings and whispered among themselves. Tomorrow, the story would be all over Willowbrook Heights. By next week, it would probably make national news. The Blackwood family scandal, I could already imagine the headlines. Prominent businessman flees FBI raid at daughter's wedding. David sat beside me on the manor's front steps, still wearing his tuxedo but with his bow tie undone and his jacket draped over my shoulders. We'd been married for exactly 6 hours, and we were already facing the kind of crisis that destroyed most relationships. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," he said quietly, staring out at the empty parking lot where Dad's Mercedes should have been. This morning, my biggest worry was whether the flowers would arrive on time. "I'm sorry," I said for the 100th time that evening. "David, I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to touch you." "You're sorry for exposing criminals?" He turned to look at me, his brown eyes reflecting the manor's security lights. "Nat, you did the right thing. I need time to process that my father-in-law tried to drug you at our wedding reception." The statement hung between us, brutal in its simplicity. My father, the man who'd shaken David's hand and welcomed him to the family just hours ago, had been planning to kidnap me. Possibly kill me. The man who'd given such a beautiful toast about love and family loyalty had been prepared to murder his own daughter to protect his criminal empire. "Mrs. Henderson?" Agent Chen approached from the manor's entrance, looking exhausted despite her professional composure. "I have some updates for you." I stood up, David rising beside me. "Did you find them?" "Not yet. But we've learned more about the scope of your father's operation." She pulled out a tablet, swiping to a series of financial documents. The Harrison Industries investigation was just the tip of the iceberg. Your father's firm has been the primary money laundering operation for at least 6 different criminal organizations over the past 5 years. The numbers on the screen were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars, flowing through dozens of shell companies, all managed by the man who taught me to balance a checkbook. "We've also discovered that your father has been planning his escape for at least 6 months, Agent Chen continued. He's liquidated several offshore accounts, established new identities for himself and your brother, and purchased property in non-extradition countries." 6 months, I repeated numbly. He's been planning to disappear for 6 months. Which means he knew about the federal investigation long before you contacted us. "Mrs. Henderson, your father didn't just discover your cooperation with law enforcement, he's been monitoring you, possibly surveilling you, for months." The violation of that revelation hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been struggling with guilt about investigating my own family, Dad had been treating me like an enemy operative. Every family dinner, every casual conversation about my work, every expression of pride in my journalistic career, all of it had been a performance while he gathered intelligence on my activities. "There's something else," Agent Chen said gently. "We found evidence that your father was preparing to frame you for the financial crimes." "Frame me?" "Forged documents suggesting you were the one who'd been embezzling from client accounts. Fake emails showing you coordinating with Harrison Industries. If his original plan had worked, if he'd successfully discredited your investigation, he was going to make you the fall guy for the entire operation." David's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. "He was going to send his own daughter to prison?" "It appears so. Your father is a very methodical man, Mrs. Henderson. He had contingency plans for every scenario, including one where you became a liability that needed to be eliminated, either through disappearance or imprisonment." I thought about all those times Dad had asked about my work, had seemed interested in my sources and methods. I'd been flattered by his attention, grateful that he was finally taking my career seriously. In reality, he'd been gathering the information he'd need to destroy me if necessary. Agent Chen, what happens now? I asked. To my mother, to the business, to all the innocent people who worked for Dad? Your mother isn't implicated in any of the financial crimes, though she'll likely face extensive questioning. The business will be seized as a criminal enterprise, and all assets will be frozen pending the outcome of the investigation. As for the employees, Agent Chen's expression was sympathetic. Unfortunately, they'll probably lose their jobs. Most of them had no idea what your father was really doing. 23 people worked for Blackwood Investments. Good people with families and mortgages and college tuition payments. People who'd trusted my father to provide them with honest employment. Now they'd all be unemployed, their professional reputations tainted by association with a criminal enterprise. This is my fault, I said. If I hadn't started investigating. If you hadn't started investigating, the criminal activity would have continued indefinitely, Agent Chen interrupted firmly. Mrs. Henderson, your father's organization was facilitating drug trafficking, human smuggling, and terrorism financing. The harm you've prevented by exposing this operation far outweighs the immediate consequences. Rationally, I knew she was right. Emotionally, I felt like I'd detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life and was now surveying the crater. What about the wedding? David asked suddenly. I mean, legally. Are we actually married? The question might have seemed trivial given everything else that had happened, but I understood why he was asking. Our marriage certificate had been signed just hours before my father had tried to drug me. Everything about this day felt surreal, contaminated by the revelation of Dad's crimes. You're legally married, Agent Chen confirmed. Though I imagine you'll both need time to process everything that's happened. An understatement if I'd ever heard one. Mrs. Henderson, you should know that your cooperation with this investigation has been exemplary. Your courage in coming forward, even knowing the personal cost, has prevented enormous harm. You should be proud of what you've done. Proud. I didn't feel proud. I felt like I'd destroyed everything I'd ever loved in the name of abstract principles like truth and justice. I felt like the perfect daughter who'd finally rebelled and discovered that rebellion came with a price she wasn't sure she could pay. Agent Chen, I said as she prepared to leave, when you catch them, my father and Marcus, what will happen to them? If convicted on all charges, your father is looking at life in federal prison. Your brother, as an accessory, would face significantly less time, possibly 10 to 15 years. Life in prison. My father, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle just hours ago, would die behind bars. As Agent Chen's car disappeared into the night, David and I sat in silence on the manor steps. Around us, the staff was cleaning up the remnants of our reception, boxing up leftover cake, collecting abandoned champagne flutes, dismantling the decorations that had taken weeks to plan. What do we do now? David asked. I looked at my new husband, this good man who'd promised to love me for better or worse but probably hadn't anticipated that the worse would include federal investigations and family betrayals on our wedding day. I don't know, I admitted. I honestly don't know. But as we sat there in the wreckage of our wedding night, I realized that despite everything that had happened, I didn't regret making that phone call to Agent Chen. I didn't regret exposing my father's crimes or preventing him from hurting more people. The perfect daughter was gone forever. In her place was a woman who'd chosen truth over family loyalty, justice over comfort, and the hard path over the easy one. Whether that woman could build a new life from the ashes of the old one remained to be seen. 2 weeks later, I sat in the conference room of Chen and Associates Legal Services, surrounded by boxes of financial documents and the wreckage of my family's life. The law firm specialized in representing whistleblowers and victims of financial crimes, and their offices had become my second home as we prepared for the federal prosecution that would eventually follow Dad and Marcus's capture. If they were ever captured. The manhunt had gone international 3 days after the wedding, when facial recognition software spotted Dad boarding a flight to Buenos Aires under a false identity. By the time Argentinian authorities reached the airport, he and Marcus had vanished again, presumably into the network of criminals they'd been serving for years. Mrs. Henderson, we've received another offer from the prosecution, Attorney Rebecca Chin said, sliding a document across the mahogany table. No relation to Agent Sarah Chin, though the coincidence had seemed like a good omen when I'd first contacted the firm. I scanned the immunity agreement, the legal language as cold and impersonal as everything else about this process. Complete immunity from prosecution in exchange for full cooperation and testimony when Dad and Marcus are arrested. It's a generous offer, Rebecca said. Especially considering your initial involvement in your father's business operations. My initial involvement consisted of growing up in Robert Blackwood's house and occasionally helping with basic bookkeeping during college summers. But in the world of federal prosecution, even that minimal connection to a criminal enterprise could be twisted into charges of conspiracy and racketeering. I'll sign it, I said. At this point, I'd already lost everything that mattered. My family was gone, my father's business was shuttered, and half of Willowbrook Heights treated me like either a hero or a traitor depending on who was asking. There's something else we need to discuss, Rebecca continued, her expression carefully neutral. The prosecution wants you to record a video statement. Something they can use if your father attempts to flee the country again when he's eventually captured. What kind of statement? A detailed account of everything you discovered during your investigation. Your father's methods, his associates, his threats against you. They want your testimony preserved in case something happens before the trial. The implication was clear. Dad had already tried to drug me once. If he was desperate enough to attempt that at his own daughter's wedding reception, there was no telling what he might do if he was cornered. When do they need it? As soon as possible. Agent Chen thinks your father might try to contact you, especially if he's running out of resources. Having your statement on record protects both you and the prosecution's case. I nodded, though the thought of Dad trying to contact me sent chills down my spine. What would he say? Would he try to justify his actions, or would he threaten me again? Would there be any trace left of the father who'd once read me bedtime stories, or had that man been a fiction all along? Mrs. Henderson, there's one more thing. Rebecca's tone became even more careful. Your mother has been asking to see you. My relationship with Mom had been non-existent since the wedding. She'd blamed me for destroying the family, accused me of betraying everything we'd built together, and made it clear that she considered my cooperation with the FBI to be the ultimate act of disloyalty. What does she want? She didn't say. But her attorney contacted us through official channels, which suggests this isn't just a personal conversation. It might be related to the federal investigation. Has Mom been charged with anything? Not yet. But the prosecution is still reviewing her finances, her knowledge of your father's activities. It's possible she knew more than she initially claimed. The thought of Mom being complicit in Dad's crimes was almost worse than everything else combined. If she'd known about the money laundering, the criminal clients, the lives that had been destroyed by their operation, then everything about my childhood had been built on lies. I'll see her, I said finally. But here, in your offices, with you present. Of course. As Rebecca made notes about scheduling the meeting, I stared out the conference room window at the busy street below. Normal people going about their normal lives, completely unaware that their world could be turned upside down in a single evening. 2 weeks ago, I'd been one of them, a small-town journalist planning her wedding and worrying about flower arrangements and seating charts. Now I was a federal witness in hiding, married to a man who was still processing the fact that his father-in-law was an international criminal, and estranged from what remained of my family. Mrs. Henderson? Rebecca's voice pulled me back to the present. There's a call for you. Agent Chen. I accepted the phone, noting how my hands no longer shook when I heard from law enforcement. That, at least, was progress. Natalie, we have a development, Agent Chen said without preamble. Your father tried to access one of his hidden accounts this morning. The transaction was blocked, but it gave us a location. Where? Sao Paulo, Brazil. Local authorities are coordinating with us, but... She paused. Natalie, your father isn't alone. The surveillance footage shows him with at least 3 other men, all armed. He's hired protection. Or he's working more directly with his criminal clients than we initially realized. Either way, this changes the risk assessment. I'm recommending that you and David consider relocating until we have your father in custody. Relocating. Moving away from Willowbrook Heights, away from the life David and I had been trying to build together, away from everything familiar and safe. For how long? We don't know. Your father has significant financial resources and dangerous connections. Until we can guarantee your safety. Agent Chen, I can't run forever. I'm not asking you to run forever. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough for us to catch him. After I hung up, Rebecca and I discussed the logistics of witness protection, temporary relocation, and the dozens of other surreal considerations that had become part of my daily life. But my mind kept returning to something Agent Chen had said: your father has dangerous connections. Not had dangerous connections. Has them. Which meant that even in hiding, even as a fugitive, Dad was still actively involved with the criminal organizations he'd been serving. This wasn't just about evading capture, he was still conducting business. Rebecca, what if Dad doesn't want to hide forever? What if he's planning something? What do you mean? Agent Chen said he's working with armed men, that he's still accessing accounts. What if he's not just running? What if he's planning to come back and finish what he started at the wedding? Rebecca's expression grew grave. Natalie, that's exactly why the prosecution wants your video statement recorded immediately. If your father is planning retaliation, then I need to make sure my testimony is preserved before he has a chance to silence me permanently. The words hung in the air between us, stark and terrifying in their implications. 2 weeks ago, I'd been worried about wedding cake flavors and photographer schedules. Now I was discussing the possibility that my own father might try to murder me to protect his criminal empire. When can we schedule the video recording? I asked. Tomorrow morning, if you're ready. I thought about David, who was at work trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while his new wife prepared to testify against international criminals. I thought about Mom, who blamed me for destroying our family instead of the man who'd actually committed the crimes. I thought about Marcus, somewhere in South America helping Dad evade justice instead of coming home to face the consequences of his actions. I'm ready, I said. Let's end this. But even as I said it, I wondered if it would ever really end. If Dad was willing to risk everything to silence me, then recording my testimony might just be the opening move in a much more dangerous game. A game where the stakes weren't just my freedom or my family's reputation, but my life itself. The perfect daughter had chosen truth over loyalty. Now she had to survive long enough to see justice done. 6 months after my wedding reception became a federal crime scene, I stood in the witness box of the United States District Court, looking directly at my father for the first time since he'd tried to drug me in the gardens of Riverside Manor. He'd been captured 3 weeks earlier at a checkpoint in Colombia, finally betrayed by one of his criminal associates who'd decided cooperation with American authorities was preferable to whatever loyalty Dad had thought he'd purchased. Marcus sat beside him at the defense table, his face gaunt and his hands shaking slightly. My brother had lasted exactly 48 hours in a Colombian jail before agreeing to testify against Dad in exchange for a reduced sentence. The golden child who'd once been destined to inherit Blackwood Investments was now facing 8 years in federal prison. Mrs. Henderson, Prosecutor Janet Walsh said, her voice echoing in the packed courtroom, please tell the court what you discovered during your investigation of Harrison Industries and its connection to your father's business. I'd rehearsed this testimony dozens of times, had recorded it on video as insurance against exactly this moment. But sitting here, with Dad's cold eyes fixed on me and reporters filling every available seat, the words felt heavier than I'd expected. I discovered that my father's investment firm was the primary money laundering operation for multiple criminal organizations, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Over 5 years, Blackwood Investments facilitated the transfer of over $200 million in illegal funds. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Even though the basic facts had been reported extensively, hearing the scope of the operation stated so plainly seemed to shock the spectators. And what was your father's reaction when he realized you were investigating these activities? He attempted to kidnap me at my wedding reception, I said, looking directly at Dad. His expression didn't change, but I saw his lawyer whisper something urgent in his ear. He drugged a syringe with Rohypnol and planned to take me somewhere to talk properly, as he put it. Mrs. Henderson, in your opinion, what would have happened if you'd gone with your father that night? Dad's defense attorney objected, but Judge Morrison overruled him. The witness may answer based on her understanding of the defendant's intentions. I took a breath, thinking about all the conversations I'd had with Agent Shin, all the evidence we'd uncovered about Dad's ruthlessness in protecting his operation. I believe he would have killed me, I said simply. He'd already prepared forged documents to frame me for his crimes if that became necessary. When that plan failed, elimination became his only option. The courtroom was completely silent. In the gallery, I could see David sitting with Rebecca Chen, his face pale but supportive. Behind him, Great Aunt Millicent sat in her wheelchair, her blue eyes fierce with pride. She'd flown in from Florida specifically for this testimony, declaring that someone from the family needed to stand witness to the truth. Mom wasn't there. She'd refused to attend the trial, maintaining to the end that I'd destroyed our family for no reason. We hadn't spoken since the week after the wedding, when she'd accused me of being a traitor who'd chosen strangers over blood. The conversation had ended with her hanging up on me, and I'd stopped trying to bridge that gap months ago. Mrs. Henderson, was there ever a point during your investigation when you considered protecting your father instead of exposing his crimes? The question I'd been dreading, because it cut to the heart of everything I'd struggled with over the past year. Yes, I said honestly. When I first realized the scope of what he was doing, I considered destroying the evidence and walking away. He was my father. I loved him. The thought of sending him to prison was devastating. What changed your mind? I looked at Dad again, remembering the man who'd taught me to drive and helped me move into my first apartment. But I also remembered Agent Chen's words about the victims of the organizations he'd been serving, the people trafficked, the communities destroyed by drugs, the families torn apart by violence funded with money my father had helped launder. I realized that love isn't about protecting someone from the consequences of their choices, I said. It's about caring enough about them to want them to be better than they are. My father chose to facilitate the harm of innocent people for profit. Loving him meant not allowing that to continue. No further questions, Your Honor. Dad's defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Morse, approached for cross-examination. I'd been warned about this part, the attempt to discredit my testimony by painting me as a vindictive daughter seeking attention or revenge. Mrs. Henderson, isn't it true that you were angry with your father for not supporting your career choice? I was disappointed, but not angry enough to fabricate federal crimes. And isn't it true that you contacted the FBI before you had any concrete evidence of wrongdoing? I contacted the FBI when I had enough evidence to suggest criminal activity. They conducted their own investigation that confirmed and expanded on my findings. Mrs. Henderson, you've admitted that you loved your father. Doesn't it seem convenient that you suddenly discovered these alleged crimes just when your journalism career needed a boost? I'd expected this line of attack, but it still stung. Ms. Morse, my journalism career was doing fine. What wasn't fine was discovering that my father was helping criminals move money that paid for drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. No career advancement is worth allowing that to continue. The cross-examination continued for another hour, but Ms. Morse couldn't shake the fundamental truth of the evidence. The financial records were clear, the money trail was documented, and multiple witnesses had corroborated the extent of Dad's operation. When I was finally dismissed from the witness stand, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. The hardest part was over. 3 days later, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Dad was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus received 8 years, with eligibility for parole after 6. The judge called the operation one of the most extensive and damaging financial crimes conspiracies she'd ever seen. As the marshals led Dad away in shackles, he turned to look at me one last time. For a moment, I thought I saw something like the father I'd once known, a flash of love, or maybe regret. But then his face hardened again, and he mouthed a single word that chilled me to the bone: traitor. That evening, David and I sat on the porch of our new house in Vermont, 300 miles from Willowbrook Heights and the wreckage of my old life. We'd moved there during the witness protection phase, and decided to stay after falling in love with the quiet mountains and the community that didn't know or care about the Blackwood family scandal. Any regrets? David asked, handing me a cup of coffee as we watched the sunset paint the valley below us in shades of gold and red. I thought about the question seriously. I'd lost my father, my brother, my mother, and most of my old friends. I'd become a national news story, a cautionary tale about family loyalty versus moral duty. I'd spent 6 months in hiding, afraid that Dad's criminal associates might try to silence me permanently. But I'd also helped stop an operation that had facilitated immense harm. I'd chosen truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty. I'd discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, and that love sometimes meant doing the hardest thing imaginable. No, I said, taking David's hand. No regrets. The perfect daughter was gone forever, destroyed in the gardens of Riverside Manor on what should have been the happiest night of her life. In her place was a woman who understood that family loyalty meant holding the people you love accountable for their choices, not enabling their worst impulses. It had taken a wedding reception turned federal crime scene to teach me that lesson. But some lessons are worth whatever they cost to learn. As the stars appeared in the Vermont sky, I realized that I was finally, truly free. Free from the weight of other people's secrets, free from the burden of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, free to build a life based on truth instead of lies. The perfect daughter had become an imperfect woman. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.